Greetings to the Venerable Masters. 尊敬的师父慈悲跟教师父. Greetings to all Amida. This is where we are in the Amida Sutra, talking about the individuals in the Dharma assembly. We've talked about Anathapindika, who was the generous supporter of the Buddha at the time. We talked about Ananda, and we started to talk about the great arhats. Firstly, the elder Śāriputra. And we've been talking about the life of Śāriputra, and last time we discussed his the analytical knowledge or wisdom. Let's do a quick review of where we left off last time. We have been discussing the 4 types of analytical wisdom of Śāriputra. 舍利弗的分别智, 分别之của Xá Lợi Phất. Our scriptural source is Anguttara Nikaya Sutra, number 174 of 4s. We have discussed in details of the first 2 types of analytical wisdom. The first type is the analytical knowledge of the true meaning, Atta Patisambhida, 亦无爱智nghĩa vô ngại trí, which is the analysis of the meanings or the results. With this ability, one can come to an accurate conclusion by studying the evidence or artifacts. So in short, this is the wisdom on the result of things, 果quả. The second type is the analytical knowledge of the Dharma, Pitasambhida, 法无爱智, 法vô ngại trí. This is the analysis of the conditions, 缘, yin. So with this ability, one can understand clearly the causes and conditions that have produced the results. So this is on the conditions, the seed, if you will. The first one is on the result. The second is on the cause, the conditions of the result. With this ability, one can understand clearly the causes and conditions that have produced the results. For example, understanding the 12 nidanas or 12 links, 12因缘, 12因缘, is to understand the conditions that lead to rebirth. We talked about this in detail last time, so we will just do a quick review so that you can have this link between last discussion and today's discussion. Or that we understand that in order to avoid suffering of poverty and loneliness, one should practice giving and sharing with others. 修布施来避免贫穷, tu bố thí để mà trừ bần cùng và đau khổ. Yeah. There are 2 types of, these are the first 2 types of analytical knowledge discussed last time. So are there any comments or questions before we move on to the third type? The third analytical wisdom is the knowledge of language. Niruti Patisambhida, 此无爱智, từ ngữ vô ngại trí. In this case, it is the language corresponding to reality concerning the true meaning and the Dharma, 法. And then the fourth one that we will discuss today is Patibana Pitasambhadi, which is the ability, the knowledge of ready wit, the clearness of insight and ability to debate on any topic. We will go into that after we discuss the third type. The Buddha attained the analytical knowledge of the natural language, which is the fundamental language, 根本语ngôn ngữ căn bản. So having attained this analytical knowledge of the natural language of words and grammar, the Buddha was able to teach the Dharma to others. So perhaps a story will help to make this clear. Okay. In the Udana volume, Sutra 5.3, there is a story. One time there was a leper, a person who was suffering from leprosy. 人风病患者, người bệnh phong cùi. So one time it was lunchtime and he was looking for food, hoping that somebody would give him food. And from a distance, he saw a big crowd. And he thought, there's a lot of people there, so that's got to be somebody distributing food. That's why people gather around. So seeing this large group of people, he approached them and thinking that he would be able to get some food that afternoon. So this is the leprosy where, this kind of condition, it's not contagious, but a long-term exposure can be contagious. But people, when you look at this condition, people with this condition, they are afraid of these people. So society will isolate them. And they feel isolated, of course. They themselves are already suffering, but they get no help from society. So in this case, this leper was approaching this crowd. And he realized that there was nobody distributing food. But in fact, it was the Buddha giving a lecture, a Dhamma talk to a big assembly. And so he said, since I'm already here, I might as well listen to the Dhamma. So he sat down and started to listen to the Buddha speaking. The Buddha, surveying the crowd, realized that the conditions were coming to fruition for people to understand his Dhamma. But he was asking himself, who here is capable of understanding the Dhamma? And then he saw this leper named Śāriputra. Śāriputra was sitting in the crowd among the audience, and the Buddha realized that this person here is capable of understanding the Dhamma. So instead of speaking to a general audience, he started to give his Dhamma talk specifically to Śāriputra, because Śāriputra was on the verge, he realized, to become a sage. So focusing on Śāriputra, the leper, person with the disease, the Buddha gave step-by-step Dhamma talk, gave him instruction. He talked about generosity, on virtue, and on heaven, heavenly rebirth. The Buddha explained the disadvantages of sense desires, desire for this world, and the corruption of the mind due to defilements, and the benefits of letting go of defilements. So he explained very thoroughly to a large audience, but his focus was on Śāriputra, the leper. Then when the blessed one, the Buddha, knew that Śāriputra, the leper's mind was ready, workable, free from hindrances, delighted and clear, then he moved on to the next level to talk about suffering, cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path to suffering. In other words, the Four Noble Truths, 四圣谛, 苦集灭道, tứ thánh đế, khổ ấu tạp diệt đạo. So these are the four basic truths about the nature of reality. From listening to the Buddha speaking, Śāriputra, the leper, attained the Dhamma eye, 法眼, Pháp nhãn. With the Dhamma eye, he was able to realize that whatever is subject to arising is subject to passing away. Right? When conditions come together, they arise. When conditions are no longer true, then they disappear. Just like the party, we call it a party because all the people coming together with gifts and it's the happy mindset. That's why we have a party. But after we eat, we talk, we get tired, everybody wants to go home, then the party is no longer there. So this is not to say that Śāriputra was being pessimistic, but he realized the truth. There's nothing wrong with it or nothing right about it. When you have a party, happy times, but when the party is gone, you may feel a little bit sad, and that is the natural way that things happen. So that's what he realized, and there is nothing for us to attach to. We shouldn't hold on to those people and say, hey, don't go home, stay and make me happy, have that party, right? That's not how we should. If we do that, we will have disappointment because people have to go home and do other things. But we should value their time. Yes, when you have time, next time, let's come together and have have a good, happy gathering, as opposed to say, you are responsible for making me happy, right? That's not how it is. It will only lead to disappointment. So that's what the leper, Śāriputra, understood, that whatever is subject to arising, 喜可以, is all subject to passing. Because when you have rising, you cannot keep rising forever. Sometime after that, some way it will decline, right? So you cannot expect things to keep on going forever. Whatever that it arises, it will be subject to passing away. Having seen the Dharma, reached the Dharma, having known the Dharma, and having crossed over doubt, meaning he has eliminated his doubt. When he looks at reality, he understands this is what it is. I should not be so personally, emotionally wrapped up and be attached to something that is meant to pass away, right? The relationship that we have with our families or with our friends, sooner or later, somebody will have to go, right? Or the car, the beautiful car that we purchased, or the beautiful house that we purchased, it will not be able to keep us happy forever, because our liking of that house will be eroded, will pass away sooner or later. Therefore, we should not be so attached to the things that are meant to go away. Does it make sense? Right? If you are attached to something that is meant to be eroded, then you are leading yourself to disappointment, because you can never control it. And when Śāriputra realized that, he was very happy. And I will share with you how he was happy, because he realized the truth. But how is it that he has realized the truth? And I will show you that in a little bit. So not only has he overcome doubt, but he has also achieved fearlessness. He no longer has fear of losing. Does it make sense? When you are no longer attached, you have no fear of losing. It is only that you are attached to something. When you value something very much, you want to protect it. That is when you have fear of losing. So Śāriputra, the leper, realized that, hey, everything comes because of conditions. Everything goes because of condition. Why should I be afraid of losing? I just need to put in the efforts, the conditions for things to become. Does it make sense? Right? So that's what he realized. So it alleviated a lot of fear in his life, because he had nothing to feed on. He had to depend on other people to give him food. So when he saw a crowd, he was very happy, thinking that somebody would distribute him food. But he was disappointed that nobody was distributing food, but instead it was the Buddha lecturing. But what he gained was even more than food that day. So he got up from his seat, he went to the Buddha, and he bowed to the Buddha. And he sat on one side because he was so happy. He wanted to demonstrate his gratitude. So he bowed to the Buddha, and then he respectfully sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "Magnificent Bhante." Bhante is a respected term to like the Buddha or a sage. Magnificent, just as if someone were to place upright what was overturned, to reveal what was hidden, to show the way to one who was lost. So he was very happy to have seen the way. He has achieved, the Buddhas call a state of deathlessness, or at least on the way there. So there is nothing for him to fear. That's why he was so happy. Therefore, he said, I go to the Blessed One for refuge, to the Dharma, and to the community of monks. So he took refuge to the three jewels. Quy y san bảo, quy y tam bảo, Phật Pháp Tăng. He said, from this day on, I shall be the follower of the Buddha. So the scripture, the sutra didn't say much, but I think the leper must have spent at least a few hours talking to the Buddha, trying to understand more of what he was learning, meaning it was the last finishing touch of this beautiful picture. So then Śāriputra, the leper, having been instructed and encouraged by the Buddha's Dhamma talk, was delighted, and he got up from his seat and he bowed to the Buddha and he left the assembly. But then upon leaving the assembly, he was attacked and killed by a cow with a calf. So he died. So just like that, after a few hours of learning from the Buddha, he walked away and he was killed. So the monks were like, what happened? So they were all very curious of what was going to happen to Śāriputra, the leper. And so they all came to the Buddha and asked the Buddha about Śāriputra's future life, that where was he going to go, what was going to be his rebirth. And so the Buddha said that monks, that leper was wise, he practiced the path, and he with the destruction of the first three fetters. So the first three fetters are self-view, attachment to ritual practice, and doubt, right? 身见, 身见, 戒取见, 疑, so thân kiến, giới thủ kiến, và nghi hoặc. Okay, so you can see whether unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, whether his death was a good thing or a bad thing. Perhaps it was more of a good thing because he no longer had to suffer from leprosy. And so how is it a good thing that he died? The Buddha explained. So he overcame the first three fetters. And then the Buddha confirmed that he became a stream entrant, 出果, 正出果, 精舍瓦. He will never be born in bad destinations, 善恶道, tam ác đạo. He is heading for enlightenment for sure. So the Buddha 肯定, right, or Buddha 肯定, the Buddha determined, was very sure in his assessments that Śāriputra was on his way to enlightenment. When this was said, the monks asked the Blessed One, well, what happened to him in the past that he became a leper, he was poor and he was miserable? What happened to him? So they asked about his future rebirth, and the Buddha explained it. Now the monks were very curious about his past. What did he do that led him to the state of suffering from leprosy, suffering from this disease, that he was poor and he was miserable? The Buddha says that in the past, Śāriputra, the leper, was a son of a rich, noble, a very rich family. He was born into a very rich family. But one time, unfortunately, he was walking along and he saw a private Buddha. And he insulted the Buddha, disrespected that Buddha. And therefore, because of that after that life, he was born in the realms of hell for many hundreds of thousands of years. And the remainder of the result of that action, that he became poor in this lifetime, and he became miserable, poor with leprosy disease in this lifetime. So that was the cause of it. But upon hearing the Dhamma, hearing the Buddha talk, that this leper acquire confidence. The author translated as confidence, but it's really faith, or 信心, 等等. Virtues are the merits, generosity and wisdom. Having acquired confidence, virtue, Dhamma, knowledge, generosity, taught by the Buddha, after his death, he was reborn in Tavatimsa heaven, the heaven of the 33, 33 天, trời 33. There he outshines the other gods both in beauty and in rank. So this is a very interesting story because we can learn a few things from this story. First, the first point is obvious, that having gained the analytical knowledge of language, the Buddha was able to teach the Dharma to Śāriputra, the leper, directly to the point and set him on the path towards enlightenment. So we know that the Buddha had that ability. The Buddha had great command of the language and was able to communicate clearly to others to understand the benefits from the teaching. Śāriputra indeed gained much from the Buddha's teaching, many, many times more beneficial than winning a lottery. Today, if you were to win a lottery, I have not checked, but it's probably in hundreds of millions of dollars. If you were to win a lottery, your life would probably be set, materially speaking anyways. But what Śāriputra, the leper, gained was forever safety from the bad destinations in hell, hungry ghosts, and animal realm. 永远离开三恶道，vĩnh viễn lìa tam ác đạo. And he became a stream entrant, 正圣人的出果，chứng được thánh sơ quả. So that the first thing that we realize is that the Buddha has this ability to teach the Dharma in a very beautiful way with words that people could understand. The second point that to gain from this story is that Śāriputra in a former life was born into a rich family, but his wealth could not protect him from suffering. So if you were to win a lottery, it would not guarantee that you will not face suffering. So that's the second thing that we can learn from this story, is that your wealth cannot protect you from suffering. Due to his disrespecting and insulting a private Buddha, that he ended up suffering in hell for many thousands and thousands of years. So as he continued to suffer in the hell, and then when he was reborn again, he continued to suffer to his lifetime on earth as a leper, 人风病患者, right? người bệnh phong củi, which is an ugly disease that everyone in society will avoid you if you have this disease. So, but he was suffering it until he became a stream entrant, 出果, 奢華, which was his guarantee of no suffering. What I'm trying to say here is that until we have attained a state of at least stream entrant, 出果, 奢華, 不退轉,不退轉, the worldly enjoyment in this life will not guarantee that we will continue to enjoy in subsequent lives. Said differently, from the perspective of the Pure Land School, 淨土法門, 法門等道, until one is reborn in Sukhavati, 極樂世界, cực lạc thế giới, there is no guarantee that one won't be reborn in an evil realm in the next life. It's very possible. The environment, if you look at it around us, is mostly promoting greed, anger, hatred, confusion, which resonate with the three evil realms. 與善惡道感應, right? 感ứng với tam ác đạo. So the second point is that wealth cannot protect us from suffering. The third point to learn from this story is that Śāriputra was a miserable leper in this life. But after having learned the Dharma, he attained a heavenly rebirth as a god that outshines the other gods both in beauty and in rank. Śāriputra didn't have much time to practice Buddhism in this life, as you can see from the sutra, that from the moment that he was in the assembly listening to the Buddha, and he asked the Buddha maybe a few questions. Probably he stayed back for a few hours to listen to the Buddha, but then he left. But the Buddha said that he had practiced all the virtues and acquired all the confidence and attained fearlessness. So even in a short amount of time, he had acquired all the conditions to become a stream entrant, 出果, 奢華. And that he was able to attain a heavenly rebirth as a god that outshines the other gods both in beauty and in rank. So he didn't spend much time accumulating merits, 修福, 度福, but he was able to purify his mind through the understanding of the Dharma. And once he was in the heaven, he attained all the beauties and happiness of a heavenly being. What I'm trying to say here is that for some people, their happiness is dependent on their family, their assets, or their jobs. For some people who live from paycheck to paycheck, they don't feel safe. If they have a stable employment and a guaranteed pension for retirement, then they will feel pretty happy about it. But as long as they have uninterrupted income, they will feel happy and safe. But this kind of happiness leads to fear of losing the stable employment and pension. This kind of happiness is actually imprisonment in disguise. It keeps sentient beings in a state of fear unconsciously. It is a false sense of security. Śāriputra shows us that through the understanding of the Dhamma and realizing the truth that we too can have a beautiful future. Just like an insect inside this bamboo tree, right? You can go vertically up to get out of that tree the long way, or you can just cut through the side to get out of the bamboo tree, taking the shortcut. The Buddha has the ability to understand the minds of others and see exactly what they need, and then uses the proper language to help them understand the Dhamma so they too can gain benefits, which is to be liberated from the cycle of life and death. So Śāriputra was not practicing Buddhism for a long time. You look at the time-wise, but he was able to achieve a heavenly rebirth, not because he went and donated $1 here and $1 there to everybody in town, but because he had a mindset of a heavenly being, 感应, 感恩. So when our mind resonates with virtue, when we are determined to be good, to be kind, to set our foot on the path to enlightenment, it is more so that we can get out of it than just to donate $1 here and $1 there. Because that is very hard work, but it's not smart. The smart thing is to change our heart. You can be donating money, but then you have not eliminated your greed, the selfishness, then that is just hard work and not smart work. Does it make sense? So Śāriputra, that's why the Buddha said that he was wise, because he was able to get to the core of his problem by understanding why he was suffering and how he could get out of it. We would be wise if we knew our own situations and how to get out of our own predicament, our own suffering. Does it make sense? So what's important here is to understand our heart, to understand what's inside of us, to understand the cause of why we are stuck here. And everybody's different. Some people are stuck because of selfishness. Some people are stuck here because they care too much about emotionally attached to family. Some people are stuck here because they care too much about money. So everybody's different. We all have to look inside us, 观照, 观究, to understand why we are stuck here. Śāriputra was wise because he was able to realize his own suffering, recognize his own suffering, and found a way out. Cutting right out of the bamboo, not go step by step by step. Right? Does it make sense? So the Buddha has this ability, the analytical knowledge of language, to use the proper vocabulary to be able to explain to people clearly. So in summary for this part, in order to fully explain the analytical knowledges of Atta and Dhamma, the first two analytical knowledge, types of analytical knowledge, one will need a wealth of words. One will need a wide range of vocabulary and grammatical forms of the natural language at one's command in order to be able to explain clearly to other people. Does it make sense? Are there any comments? So let me give you another example just to illustrate how important it is and what it means. For example, we use the single word fasa, meaning contact, sense impression, 触,接触的触, suk, deep suk. Fasa is expressed in different ways because the Buddha has the ability to express in different ways to get the meaning across. Because if, for example, here, if I were to just explain to you, yes, and the analytical knowledge of grammar is to explain clearly to people, it may not get the message through. So I would have, I'm learning from the Buddha to use different way of explaining it, to use different stories to explain it, to make it clear. For example, just as we have pusana, meaning being in contact, or sampusana, full contact, or sampasitata, meaning contacting well. So this helps to bring out its various intrinsic meanings. So allow me to elaborate on this a little bit more. Fasa, chu, or suk, deep suk, arises together with every sita, the mind, xin. It contacts the object so that the mind can experience it. 六根接触, 六尘产生, 六识和经验, right? Sáu căn tiếp xúc sáu trần, tạo ra sáu thức và kinh nghiệm. For example, when seeing, 看, thấy, experiences visual objects, 尘, 整, phasa, which is contact, which accompanies the seeing consciousness. It also experiences the physical object. So when you see an object, you see the object, right? The function of seeing it, but you also experience it. Meaning when you look at this flower, it's not just about looking at the flower, but you see, oh, it's a beautiful flower, or it's an ugly flower. It's a beautiful vase or an ugly vase. So you have that experience as well. So this contact is not just seeing, but experience that comes with it. So at that moment, fasa contacts a visible object, just like the flower, and the conditions of seeing to see. So you need the condition, meaning that to experience this beautiful flower, you must have the eyes to see clearly, and the object, which is the flower, and your concentration, you can't just pass away. You have to focus on it to experience it. So the more focus, the more experience. Oh, it is a beautiful pink, orchid. Not just a rose, but it's an orchid. So you can experience the beauty of nature or the flowers. We should understand that fasa, or contact, chu, suk, is not just touch in the physical sense, but more like to come together under conditions or sense mental impression. Because there's also contact when you close your eyes and you have this mental state, thoughts. So it's not physical, but you can also have contact because you have focus on the mental state. Does it make sense? So that's fasa, is contact, right? Contact is not physical contact, but your mental impression, your sense impression. 影像恩德. Fasa occurs when three factors arise. First you have the physical sense, 根, gang, and you have the objects, 尘 or 整, and the consciousness or paying attention, 视或者专注力, thức hoặc là chuyên chú. What I'm trying to say here is that one needs to know many vocabulary, many words to be able to describe the Dhamma accurately to others. If one knows the Dhamma but cannot explain it to others, then one does not yet have the analytical knowledge of language. And the Buddha clearly had this ability to be able to explain to Supa Buddha, the leper. Niruti Pati Sambhida, which is the third type, is the ability to have access to a wealth of expressive language to precisely describe one's intention, one's message. And according to one author, it's also the ability to understand a foreign language that one has not learned before. So if you have this ability, you can quickly learn a new language very easily. According to the book Buddhist Sutras, Origin, Development, Transmission by Kogen Mizuno, it says here that in present day, today in India, more than 10 major languages belonging to this family. Together, they number several hundreds dialects. Even in China, you have different dialects, right? So different. Sometimes, I mean, they are almost different languages because they sound so different. And it's not uncommon in if you were to live in India, you have your family living under one house, the same house, that you could be speaking different languages because you as parents would speak a certain language and your servants would speak a certain language because they were not supposed to use the same language that you were using, because as servants belonging to a lower class, they cannot use the language used by the upper caste. And so even within the same house, you could have many languages going on at the same time. So the author continues that even in Shakyamuni Buddha's time, regional languages already differ, and each language had its own unique characteristics. So it would be conceivable that the Buddha and Śāriputra would have had the analytical knowledge of languages, knowing many different languages, in order to communicate the Dhamma to the people around them, or to the people that they encounter as they travel throughout the various parts of India, various villages in India. The function of the Buddha's Dhamma is to help people to grow, to help them to develop. And that was the Buddha was doing, and people had a lot of respect for the Buddha. They revere the Buddha because what the Buddha taught helps them out of their misery, help them out of their suffering, for them to grow, for them to develop, for them to become better. We can say that it is the teaching of the enlightened person to the non-enlightened individual, the teaching of the spiritually free person to the person who is not yet spiritually free. The Buddha's Dhamma is one human being talking to another, encouraging another, trying to help another. So that's what the Buddha was able to give this lecture to this Śāriputra, the leper, and he was able to develop. He was able to set himself free from all suffering forever, going forward. The Buddha is in touch with other human beings. He knows their needs. He knows their mental states. He knows how they are to be helped, and he knows how to put things to them. Right? The Buddha knows to use the kind of words, whether the kind of vocabulary, and also the sound of the speech to soothe those who are listening to him. He knows how to put his Dhamma in a way that everybody can understand. This is because he has the analytical wisdom of language to be able to communicate to mundane beings, 凡夫, and help them to become enlightened beings. 觉悟者, Are there any comments or questions before we move on? Is it all clear how important it is? And it is, we can believe that the Buddha had this kind of wisdom. Sometimes the Buddha's ability to communicate with others is beyond words, beyond language. So this type of true communication occurs before we have our thoughts in our head, before we can say something. This is mind to mind, 心与心的沟通, right? tâm với tâm的溝通. In this way, true communication is direct. and has no confusion. Just like a clear radio signal, a clean radio signal without any noise or interference. It's very clean. You can understand very clearly. Our wandering thoughts, 妄想膨tưởng, can obscure the original message. And the wrong words sometimes that we use can misdescribe things that we want to convey and can cause confusion in the listener. But true and direct communication is mind to mind. 心与心就是直接沟通，tâm với tâm沟通trực tiếp. Without wandering thoughts interfering to cause confusion, it's just clean and clear signal. So let me share with you a story to make it clear about direct communication beyond words. In the Udana volume, Yasoja Sutra, one day there were 500 monks led by Venerable Yasoja visiting the Buddha. They exchanged greetings with the resident monks already living there, and they were settling in to stay. They made loud noises which disturbed the Buddha. The Buddha then asked Ananda, "What is going on? Sounds like fishermen catching fish. Why is it so noisy?" Then Venerable Yasoja and the monks came to greet the Buddha, but the Buddha disapproved their bad behavior and told them that he did not want to stay near them. He said, "Go away, monks, I dismiss you. Now you are not to stay in my vicinity. You're not to be close to me because you are just way too noisy. Your behavior is very disrespectful." And so the Buddha decided to find another place and wander off. The Buddha then settled at the gabled pavilion in the great forest. He went to another place to stay, to get away from all the noise. So while he was staying there, the Buddha said to Venerable Ananda, "Send a messenger into their presence to say, 'The teacher calls you, friends. The teacher wants to see you.'" So the Buddha wants Ananda to have another monk to go tell the 500 monks to come see the Buddha. Responding, Venerable Ananda replied, "As you say, Lord," to the Blessed One, to the Buddha. And he went to a certain monk and said to that monk that the Buddha wanted the 500 monks to come to see the Buddha. The monks, having received the message, cleaned up their lodgings, packed their belongings, and went to see the Buddha in the great forest where the Buddha was staying. At that time, the Buddha was sitting in imperturbable, immovable meditation, 不动禅定, 不动停定. And the monks were, when he saw that, they wonder what mental state the Buddha was in. 他们想知道佛陀现在安住哪一种禅定的境界. Right? Mấy vị tăng muốn biết Phật đang an trụ trong cảnh giới thiền định nào. Then they realized that the Buddha was residing in the imperturbable meditation, immovable meditation, 不动禅定, 不动停定. So they also sat in immovable meditation. While all this was going on, Venerable Ananda didn't even have a clue of what was happening. He thought that the Buddha the Buddha sitting in meditation was not aware that the 500 monks had come to visit the Buddha. And Ananda thought that the monks were sitting there waiting for the Buddha to greet them, because the Buddha summoned them to come to see the Buddha. And so Ananda, quietly, respectfully, went to the Buddha, bowed to the Buddha, and gently told the Buddha that the visiting monks had been sitting there for a long time, so it was time for the Buddha to greet them. When this was first said, the Blessed One remained silent. The Buddha remained silent. After a while, Ananda returned to the Buddha and reminded him the second time. But the Buddha continued to remain in silence. Hours later, Ananda came back to check in with the Buddha again, and once again reminded the Buddha for the third time. Then the Blessed One, the Buddha, emerging from his immovable concentration, 佛陀处定, Phật Đà xuất định, said to Venerable Ananda, Ananda, he said, Ananda, if you had known, not even that much would have occurred to you to say, I, along with all 500 of these monks, have been sitting in immovable concentration. So essentially, the Buddha was telling Ananda, if only you knew what was going on, meaning the communication beyond words between the Buddha and the 500 monks, you wouldn't have bothered me like this. The Buddha was able to communicate with the 500 monks clearly without confusion. He understood them, they understood him, so they were able to sit in meditation. So communication is more than just words. So this type of communication is mind to mind, right, directly. The third type of analytical wisdom is perfect communication without communication through the perfect use of language, words, and grammar. Right? We sometimes use language without understanding, therefore reinforcing ideas of reality, the wrong ideas of reality, leading to much egoistic attachment, 我执, 我執, and eventually suffering for ourselves. For example, we say, I am eating, I am pretty, I am walking. We use such language to reinforce the belief that there is the I or me that really exists as one entity, without any awareness that we are reinforcing the ego, 增长这个自我, tăng trưởng cái bản ngã của mình. We have never stopped to ask, for example, we talked about I am walking, that who is it that's walking? Is it the feet that are walking? No, is it the legs that are walking, the muscles moving, or the brain controlling the muscles to move? We have never really asked that question to really have this awareness of our own actions. We have never stopped to think that I am walking. It's just the process of walking, right? It's just one of the many processes. It's not just one process, but it's a system of processes that are working together. That we have this body. For example, in this illustration, you have the muscles to support. You have the legs. You have the brain controlling your balance. So there are many things to have this process of walking, right? So it's not just one entity walking, but there are many components that are walking. Does it make sense? So when we use language that we don't have awareness, we are reinforcing the idea of the ego, 我执, 我執. Now we have this mechanical process, the muscles moving, joints moving, and the communication process between the brain and down to the muscles through the many sensors with the intention to walk. You need to have the intention to walk in order to walk. Just because you can walk, but if you don't want to walk, then you cannot walk. So it's not one entity, 一体, 一体, but there are many components working together to have this called I am walking. If any of those processes don't work, then there is no walking, right? If you don't want to walk, or your muscles don't cooperate, you won't walk. Therefore, there is no I or me. There's no I am walking. So when we use the word I, like I do this, I want that, without awareness of the processes, we are misleading ourselves, taking us further and further away from enlightenment. Right? The analytical knowledge of language should not lead to confusion. Right? The Buddha was able to use language to help Śāriputra, the leper, to reach enlightenment. But we don't have that ability, so when we use language, we are taking ourselves away, further away from enlightenment, closer to suffering. Yes.
If you say that we don't use I in the term of communication, so when you talking to others and you forget yourself using I as a term to express yourself to others, so it seems like disrespectful in the term of communication between smaller person or lower person, or not lower, or younger person speaking to the older person. So how does it work related to this?
So every culture has its way of behaving to maintain harmony. For example, if you were to take an Asian culture and you were to impose it on a person who has been born here, raised in Western society, you can cause confusion and you can cause resistance. They will not listen, right? So we sometimes have to be smart about dealing with people. The point is about communication, right? It's not about just I'm telling you something, but to communicate and whatever that takes to communicate. If you are in a environment where being respectful to the elderly, meaning to say certain words in order to show the respect, then we should say that. But in a sense where if you are too formal, for example, we should always be respectful. But if you have kids coming in here and you want to introduce Buddhism to them, but you say, no, don't do this, don't do this, don't move, sit still, then they say, okay, after this time, I'm not going to ever come back. So then we are not communicating Buddhism. But if we let them loose up, say, yeah, Buddhism is fun, Buddhism can help you, then they'd feel more, yeah, Buddhism is something really beneficial to me, as opposed to, I can't even do anything when I sit here. Then we're not communicating, right? So in an environment where everybody around you expects you to use certain words to be respectful, to maintain harmony, then yes, we should comply. But if we were to take that environment and impose it on somebody else, then they are not going to be very receptive to us. Does it make sense?
It doesn't make any sense. Because I didn't say that to make the environment to become very harsh. My question is to express yourself with others older than you, or at the level of communicating, not only for Asian traditional, but also American who was born here or raised here. When you're speaking to each other, we say I or you. We have to express ourselves at the third communication. It cannot be said because of this traditional or because of new traditional, cannot forget that. Or cannot because of that, we ban people not to do it. It doesn't mean that way.
Okay, yeah. So when I say we should not use I don't mean to not use I, but to have awareness. We should be clear in the way that we communicate. Because if you look at a sentence structure, you have the object, you have the subject. Like, I am walking. You can't just leave and say, walking. Then who's walking? Then if you were already achieving a state of enlightenment, then you will not say much. Just like the 500 monks, they were able to communicate. So they didn't have to use words. So they were sitting there. The Buddha was sitting there. The Buddha was sitting there. There was no disrespect. Because they were sitting there and they were communicating. So communication is more than just, yes, sir, yes, sir. You may say that, but your heart is not convinced. You're just saying that to please somebody. But there is no respect in your heart. So ultimately there is no respect. Does it make sense? Because the monks were sitting there. The Buddha was sitting there, but they were able to communicate. The Buddha did not say, monks, you are disrespectful. Why don't you say something to greet me? The Buddha did not say that. But the Buddha complimented the monks that the monks were in meditation with the Buddha. They were in the same state of existence. So therefore, there was no disrespect just because the monk didn't say a greeting to the Buddha. They came, but the Buddha was sitting in meditation. They did not want to disturb the Buddha, so they quietly sat down, waiting for the Buddha. And Ananda, thinking that the Buddha didn't know the monks were there, reminded the Buddha, but the Buddha said to the monk that they were already in communication. I'm afraid to ask, does that make sense? So what I'm trying to say is, it's about the intention. It's not the words you use. I may say, I like you. With that expression, it does not mean that I really like you or I respect you. But you can see my expression, my words. So my intention is more than the words I use. How we say the words can convey more than the words themselves. So what's more important is the communication. Sometimes we have to remove the layer of formality in order to get to the core. There was a movie in the 80s about this high school where it was very troublesome because there were fights every lunchtime. And there was a teacher who knew about it, and I think it was based on a true story. Michelle Pfeiffer, she was the actor, but she played this role. So she came in to help the students there. There was going to be a big fight. And if you remember, you watched the movie. So there was going to be a big fight, and there was going to be some killing, serious fighting. And she did not want the students to get hurt. And so she went in to took on that job to teach that class. But the students were very disobedient. They did not listen, and the principal was giving up on the students. But she thought that she could help them. So she went in to help them, to be their friends, to talk to them. And one time, that day, when the fight was about to occur, she almost was successful in convincing him to give up the fight. But when he walked into the principal's office, he had changed his mind. He was really to seek for guidance because he was lost. He was just a growing adolescent, right? Growing up, a young man growing up, looking for ways, for guidance. So she was not available, I think, so that's why he could not talk to her. But he went to talk to the principal. And the principal had already looked down on him because he was just a troublemaker. So he did not even bother to talk to him. And he got so upset that nobody loved him. He was looking for somebody to care. But this principal turned him down. They didn't want to talk to him. But he wanted to talk his heart out for somebody to listen. But the principal did not talk to him because the principal had given up on him. And so because of that he decided to enter the fight. He was going to ask for a way to get out of the fight. So when Michelle Pfeiffer, the actor playing the role of the teacher, realized what was happening, she was so mad. She talked to the principal that, why did you not talk to him? You could have avoided a fight. You could have saved his future. So what I'm trying to say is that it's the communication, the way that we open ourselves up, not necessarily the words that could change people. What is more important is communication. Yes, the certain words that we use are important to maintain harmony and respect in a certain environment, but it's not always true. We cannot be so static. We have to be dynamic and changeable. How we communicate to an adult is different from how we communicate to our peers of the same age group or to a younger age group, right? So I agree, yes, when we talk to an elderly person who has this tradition of respect, we should use that language. But when we talk to a young kid who has not been taught of that, but when we confine ourselves in that way, we are not communicating. We have to be flexible. Buddhism teaches us to be flexible. Does it make sense? Okay.
You probably misunderstood me because I didn't say that. When we communicating with kids, we have to be very purposely speaking in the term of politely for them to scare. No, I didn't mean that way. So I just clarify that when you play with kids, you have your term, you have words, you have your roles as to play with the kids, a different scenario. With the younger, with similar age or with the elder, then they're different.
But anyway, yes, appreciate that. What I'm trying to communicate here is the Buddha had this ability to communicate to his listeners, his audience, by using words that would lead him to enlightenment. We sometimes do damage to ourselves by not using the proper words without awareness. We say, I want to do this, I do that. We are reinforcing the idea of this ego, 自我, bản ngã. And so we are taking ourselves away from enlightenment. That was all I was trying to say, right? So we should have awareness in the words that we say. We have to use the proper grammar. I am doing this. You cannot say, I doing this. No, you have to use the proper grammar. But when you use I, you have awareness of, yes, there is not I, but it's a process of things, right? Okay. Okay. Let's move on to the fourth type of, I'll skip this one. The fourth type of analytical knowledge of ready wit. 辩才无智爱明代波爱之. According to our source here, Pali Canon, a manual of Abhidhamma, the analytical knowledge of ready wit, patibana, patisambhida, means the knowledge of the above mentioned three kinds of knowledge in all the details. In short, this knowledge here is where you combine all these three and you put all these types of knowledge into practice. So comprising the first three, Atta, Dhamma, and Niruti. Okay. So again, Atta Patisambhida is the analytical knowledge of discriminative and comprehensive knowledge about results, right? 这是因的智慧，係啦，nhân trí tuệ của nhân. So be able to come to an accurate conclusion based on evidence. And then the second, now that's Atta, and then the Dhamma is the analytical knowledge with the discriminative and comprehensive knowledge about, the conditions, about the cause. So the first one, again, is the result. The second one is conditions or cause. And the third one, Niruti, is the analytical knowledge about words and grammar that we just talked about. So we have already discussed these three types of knowledge already, so we won't spend too much time to explain the fourth type. But briefly put, the fourth knowledge is the wisdom about the three kinds of analytical wisdom, which has all knowledge, all three combined, and you're able to express it. The Buddha attained the knowledge, this is called the knowledge of knowledges, as soon as he attained Buddhahood. So one source explains that patihana, patisavit means eloquence, 辩才, 辩才, with excellent verbal skills to debate any subject on the spot with anybody. So one who has this ability is a great debater. One time, the Buddha was met with an angry man who was verbally abusing the Buddha. He was so displeased that he came to the Buddha and insulted the Buddha with rude and harsh words. And the Buddha said, "What do you think, Brahmin? Do friends and colleagues, relatives and family members and guests come to visit you?" So the Buddha didn't address his anger, but asked him a question. Do your friends, family come and visit you from time to time? And this angry Brahmin says, sometimes they do. And the Buddha says, do you then serve them with fresh and cooked foods and savories? So in the Indian tradition, it was the Indian people looked at guests very kindly. They always welcome guests. Sometimes they treat guests as like very like sages sometimes, because they would cook, they would cater to them, they would treat the guests very well. And so this is very, of course, the Buddha was setting him up, right? Because this is something that is very common, or it was common for Indians to serve their guests with foods and all kinds, the best that they could afford. And so this angry man says, sometimes I do serve them with food. The Buddha says, but if they don't accept it, Brahmin, who does it belong to? The Brahmin says, in this case, it still belongs to me, because if they don't like it, then it's mine. Then the Buddha says, in the same way, Brahmin, when you abuse, harass, and attack us, who do not abuse, harass, and attack you back, we don't accept it. It still belongs to you, Brahmin. It belongs to you still. So all your insults, all your harsh words, here you go. They belong to you. And so the Brahmin lost the argument, so he changed subject. He said, well, you're not very so perfect, because I've heard that kings and his retinues, his followers, believe that Master Gautama, in this case the Buddha, is a perfected one, but yet he can still get angry. Sometimes you're angry. Then the Buddha cleverly replies, for one free of anger, tamed, living in balance, free by right knowledge, a poised one who is at peace, where would anger come from? Right? If your mind is free, how can you have anger? The Buddha further explains, when you get angry, you just make things worse for yourself. When you don't get angry at any angry person, you win a battle hard to win. When you know that the other is angry, you act for the good of both yourself and the other, if you're mindful and stay calm. Okay. Having heard that, he had no other way to argue, so therefore he exclaimed, excellent, Master Gautama. I go for refuge to Master Gautama, to the teaching, and to the Manikan Sangha monks. So he was taking refuge to the three jewels, 皈三宝, 佛法僧, 担保, 佛法tăng. Sir, may I receive the going forth, chujya, sukya, the ordination in the ecstatic Gautama's presence. So he became a monk in the Buddha's presence. And then he took the instructions from the Buddha and achieved his own insight. And therefore he came to the understanding, to the realization of truth, that birth is ended, spiritual journey has been completed, what had to be done has been done, there is no return to any state of conditioned existence. Conditioned existence is the cycle of life and death, lunhui. And Venerable Bharavaja became one of the perfected Arahant. So the Buddha understood why that Brahmin was angry and the conditions of the matter, and used the proper logic and language to calm him down, and eventually was able to help him to achieve enlightenment. So that's an illustration of how the Buddha was able to counter an argument and be able to help the other partner, as opposed to push him down. In today's society, we take satisfaction in defeating our opponent. But that's not very clever, because you want the society to be constructive. So what's even better is to not only defeat your component, but to help your component to be successful. And that's what the Buddha was achieving, was a win-win situation. It was not a win-lose situation. It was so obvious that he was losing, because he ran out of ways to attack the Buddha. But the Buddha did not disgrace him, did not put him down, kick him when he was down. But the Buddha was able to accept him, train him, and help him to achieve enlightenment, to be liberated from the cycle of life and death forever. So I will tell you another story to make this point, and then we will conclude. In this story, the Buddha was insulted in a clever way by a farmer, and we will see how the Buddha was able to handle such criticism. In Kasi Bharavacha Sutra, it has that the Buddha was going for alms round, 几时, kaktuk. So one day, the Buddha was going for alms round, and he came to this farmer, and it was time for food distribution. And he was just standing there, waiting for this farmer to give him some food. So during that time, I'm sure even today, people use oxen to plow the ground. The farmer said, I plow, and having plowed and sown, I eat. You should also do some work to earn your living. No, don't be a burden to society. That's what he was saying. But the Buddha replied, I do work as well. And having plowed and sown, I eat. And the farmer was confused, say, well, where are your tools? I don't see you. I don't see your yoke. I don't see your oxen. I don't see your ground. I don't see the seeds. Where you say you're plowing, but you're not doing anything. I don't see it. I'm a little bit confused. And so the Buddha says, faith is my seed, austerity, the rain, wisdom, my yoke, modesty is the pole, mind, the strap, mindfulness is my plowshare and goad, control in speech and conduct, I make truth my weed cutter, arhatship my deliverance complete, exertion draws me to Nibbana's security. And then he concluded, plowing which bears the fruit of deathlessness. Having plowed, this plowing one is free from every illness. This is very interesting because this is very common. People put in a lot of work to secure the future. Right? We sometimes work overtime to make sure we have enough to cover our expenses. And we call this security. But the Buddha thinks differently. He say, it's not your money that makes you secure, right? It's not your bank account. It's not how much weeds you have that you feel secure, but it's your mind. Does it make sense? So the Buddha is saying that don't just depend on material things that you feel you have worked for your security, but you should focus on cultivating the mind, eliminating selfishness, eliminating greed, eliminating all the negativity, then you will feel safe, right? So it's not how much money you have, but how much you have eliminated your your egoism, right? When you are egoless, you have no egoistic attachment, there is no fear. We have fear because we have a lot to lose, right? When we have nothing to lose, there is no fear. But when we say we have nothing to lose, it doesn't mean we don't have anything, but we have everything. So the Buddha has everything because he has nothing to lose. Because if you have everything, let's say air around you, do you have fear of losing air? It doesn't make sense, right? So because air is always around you. But if you were sick and you have this oxygen bottle with you, you carry it with you, now you have fear of running out of oxygen. Does it make sense? So the farmer was like, yeah, I'm securing my oxygen bottle here because I'm afraid of running out of air. But the Buddha say, just breathe. If you are healthy and you can breathe air, there is endless. Air is everywhere. Does it make sense? So when we want to achieve nirvana, Nibbana, Nibbana, and we want to have this state of deathlessness, 无生, 无生, and to be free from illness, then we should cultivate the mind. That is more important. Because if you, let's say you're afraid of being ill, and so you save a lot, they have the health savings account, HSA, to use for the rainy day in case you need to go to a hospital to use that money, then you are telling yourself, I want to be sick one day so I can use this money. It is much better to cultivate loving kindness and to cultivate the proper causes so that we can prevent or minimize illness. Does it make sense? If you are kind, if you have no anger in you, you are not inducing illness. You are not inducing stress to cause illness. If you have a lot of money, but there's a lot of worry, then you are inducing stress, and therefore you are inducing illness. Does it make sense? So the Buddha was able to use his ability to deflect the attack, the criticism coming from the farmer. Initially, it made sense, right? Master Gautama, why don't you work? Do some work, make good use of yourself. Don't be a burden to society. But the Buddha looked at it differently and say, you are cultivating, you are accumulating a lot of money, a lot of food for yourself, but it leads to fearlessness. Is that really good? Is that truly security? It's not. So the Buddha is teaching him in a way, cleverly, be able to deflect and debate on the spot, right? Be able to convince him to accept. And so then he said, oh, that makes total sense. So then he made an offering of the golden bowl with milk rice to the Buddha. But the Buddha said, nope, no thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. Because he had already given the Dhamma talk. He would not accept anything after the Dhamma talk. So it's very interesting that the Buddha's behavior was that, well, you should have given the offering at first to show respect. But now that I have convinced you, I have given you the Dhamma talk, it would not be proper for me to accept your offering. So when we go to a Dhamma assembly to listen to a master speaking, 法会, we should make offerings first before the assembly starts, before the master starts talking, giving speech. Otherwise, it would be an exchange for benefits. Oh yeah, I'm giving you Dhamma talk, in exchange you give me money. So that is not proper. So the Buddha is teaching us how to show respect, like Master. We're talking about respect. So the Buddha is also teaching here. He made a point to the Brahmin, and it was significant enough to be written down, because not every word was written down, but this section here is written down to show us how important it is that when we go to Dhamma talk, in order to cultivate a lot of merits, we should show respect. And one way to show respect is, if we want to make an offering, we should make an offering before the Dhamma talk starts. Does it make sense? Yeah. So I thought it was interesting that the Buddha did not accept the farmer's offering. After all, he was on his alms round, 乞食, kakte. But then the offering was made to him. He said, nope, thanks, but no thanks. Because he wanted to show the farmer the proper way of making an offering. Okay. This is in Chinese called 买卖如来, mua bán như lai. I think that's the right term in Chinese. So we don't want that to happen. Well, meaning exchanging the Dhamma for financial gain. Yeah. So are there any comments or questions before we end? Okay, so let's quickly review. There are 4 types of analytical knowledge, 分别智, that we spent last time and this time talking about. The first one is the analytical knowledge of true meaning, 意无爱智, 无爱智, which is the analysis of meanings, the results, the ability to draw accurate conclusions based on artifacts. So this is on the result side. And then the second type, that's Atta Pita Sambadi. Dhamma Pita Sambadi is the analysis of the Dhamma or conditions. And then the third one is Naruti Pati Sambadi. is the knowledge of language, grammatical analysis, to have a wide range of vocabulary to communicate clearly so that they can be on the path to enlightenment, as opposed to further and further away from enlightenment. And then the fourth type is knowledge of ready wit. 辯無礙智, khéo léo vô ngại trí. Clearness of insight, ability to debate on any topic, including ability to convince and not only defeat your opponent, but able to help your opponent realize the truth so that they too can develop and grow and benefit from the debate. And the ability to convince others and preserve harmony. Because the Buddha could have destroyed the Brahmins, right? Could have really taken them down, but instead of insulting the Brahmins and the farmer, saying how stupid they were depending on their anger to satisfy them or their plowing for security, but he did not do that, but he helped to raise them. Because the purpose of the Dhamma is to help sentient beings grow and develop, right? If it doesn't help you to grow and develop, then it is not Dhamma. It is not Buddhism. Does it make sense? Okay. So today's topic was not easy to understand, and we learned about it in order to understand about Śāriputra's or the Buddha's abilities and what made Śāriputra or the Buddha wise. And in this case, we use the Buddhas for illustrations. This is to give us more faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. 身信三宝, 等受担保. That it is really worth it for us to commit ourselves to the study of the Dhamma. It is very beneficial to us because the purpose of the Dhamma is to help us to develop and to grow, right? So that should conclude today's discussion on the 4 types of analytical knowledge.